So welcome everybody. As Brian said, my name is Katie Kosis. I am the Director of Financial Aid at University. And tonight we're going to go over a financial aid presentation. And even though I'm from Niagara, what we talk about today is not geared toward Niagara University. It's about financial aid in general. Whether you're going to a state university or a private school, this is for financial aid as a general overview. My contact information is on the screen, and the 8686 number is our general financial aid number, but feel free to reach out to that, and my team will be more than happy to assist. If you need to email me directly, there's my contact information as well. So we're going to get started. Before I do get started, well, a couple of things actually. If you can mute yourselves, just so there's not a lot of feedback. If you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat and I'll get to them either as maybe kind of in the midsection or either at the very end, but feel free to pop them in there as things come up that you might have questions on. And then also in the chat earlier, put, sorry, I'm trying to admit people in the waiting room, put in the FAFSA on the web worksheet that we're going to go over. So there's a PDF of that, and then also the financial aid brochure, which we will go over as well in a little bit more detail. So both of those are attached in the chat, and if you can't see them, I will be sure to add them later on again as well. Okay, so the first step for the FAFSA, in order to apply for the FAFSA, you have to have your FSA ID first. So the FSA ID, this is really electronic signature for both the student and a parent. In order to apply, you can go to fsaid.ed.gov. You need one for the student and one for at least one parent. Both parents don't need them. We do encourage that at some point both parents do apply for an FSA ID, just so that at some point, if you need the other one to sign off on the FAFSA, or if you're applying for Parent Plus loans potentially, both parents have them. But in order to complete the FAFSA, you only need to have one parent sign off on it. One key for this is that you need to be sure to use separate email addresses when you're one for the student and one for the parent. If you try to use the same one, it's going to cause a lot of issues down the road. It'll take much longer because it's going to confuse the two. So make sure you're using separate email addresses when creating the FSA IDs. And the FAFSA, I'll get to that a little bit more in a second, but the FAFSA does stand for the Free Application for Federal Student Assistance. And this is really the driving factor in obtaining any additional aid through a college, through university, above and beyond any merit scholarships that the student might receive. So this is really the driving force, and the student wouldn't be eligible for any other aid unless this is completed. But first step, getting your FSA ID. Now, once you have that, you need to complete the FAFSA form. And just as again, if you could just be sure to mute yourselves so we don't get that feedback, that would be great. But so the FAFSA on the web worksheet that we're going to go over today, it really is more of a general overview, guideline. Completing the FAFSA, this is not something you're going to mail in. It's just knowing what you're going to have to online when you complete the FAFSA. I'm assuming everyone on the call is either a parent of a senior or a current senior in high school. And if that's the case, you're going to be completing the 21-22 FAFSA form. You need to be careful when you're out there because there's both the 2021 FAFSA and the 21-22 FAFSA out there. There's both years at the moment. So please be sure to complete the 21-22 FAFSA if your student will be starting in the fall of 2020. The first part, so this is the student's FAFSA, and they will need to input all their information first in order to begin. It's going to ask for basic information, last name, first name, their social security number. Please be sure you're inputting the correct social security number. We have had families use siblings' information by accident or their own social or parts of both. So make sure you have all that information ready to go before you start completing the form. It will ask the citizenship status of the student. In order to be eligible for any federal aid, the student does have to be either a U.S. citizen or an eligible non-citizen, like a permanent resident. International students, Canadians, be eligible for this. So it'll ask that information, and then it's also going to ask if the student is single, married, separated, divorced. Of course, coming from high school, most times they are just single. They would put information. It's then going to go on and ask some additional information for the student. It's going to ask about the selective service registration. Something to note is that if the student is male, and at least 18 years old, they do have to register for this elective service in order to be eligible for any federal aid. If they do not register, they unfortunately are not eligible for any federal aid. This is something that has been brought up to potentially.
Come on down here.
Oh, yep. Just make sure to mute yourselves. This is something that has been talked about potentially going away, but for the moment, it is something that still has to be completed. If the student is 17 at the time of completing the FAFSA, not a problem. It will allow you to complete it for that year, but not for the following year. You would have to sign up for the selective service. It's going to ask with the highest school, parent 1 or parent 2 completed. Please note it's not mother or father, it is parent 1 or parent 2. You need to be sure you're being consistent with when you input parent 1's information all the way through the FAFSA. Don't mix up parent 1 and parent 2 as you're going through. It's then going to ask information or questions about the student's dependency status. These questions, like if the student was born before January 1st, 1998, if they're married, if they have children, if they're in foster care, if they're legal guardianship, if they're homeless, emancipated minor. There's a lot of different things that students could potentially fall into. If they can say yes to any of those questions, they would, and then they would be considered an independent student. Please note, though, that sometimes students will, say that they're in legal guardianship or whatnot, and they're not. It's not legal guardianship as far as the paperwork is concerned. So schools will most likely ask for depending upon some of these answers, because unfortunately sometimes students pick it even though they're actually still a dependent student. So the schools will want to follow up with the student and the family members to see if there's additional documentation that they can provide. Now, most likely, 9 times out of 10, students coming from high school don't meet any of these criteria, and they would be considered a dependent student. And what that means is, as a dependent student, they will have to provide parental information on the FAFSA in order for it to be valid. So a question I get asked a lot is, okay, so my student is a dependent student. What do I report? Which parent information? So if the parents are married, bio parents are married, or you're unmarried but you are living together, you would report both parents as being in the household and both of their incomes and asset information. If the parents are divorced, then you would report the parent with whoever the student lives with more than 50% of the time with during the prior 12 months. Now, there's 365 days in a year. Technically, it can't really be 50-50, but I know there's some, legal agreements and custody agreements that say it's, half the time here, half the time there. So if that's the case, the parent you would then report would be whoever provides the most financial support for the student during those prior 12 months. And this could be anything from like child support, or health insurance. If the student is on a parent's health insurance, that would be counted towards the amount of support. So that is who you would report. Also, let's say, okay, in a case of a divorce, student resides with mom. Mom is now remarried to stepdad. You have to report stepdad in the household and stepdad's income as well. Even if stepdad is not, providing any additional support to the student directly, he is still included in the household as well as his income. That's a question that comes up quite frequently. So keep it in mind as you're going ahead and reviewing all of that. All right, I'm going to hit the chat really quick. Oh, perfect. Thank you, Brian. The chat. So moving on. Now that you know which parent to report or parents to report, you are then going to report that information and provide that information. So again, parent 1, parent 2, make sure you're being consistent. It's also going to ask if the parent has created or has completed their taxes. Now, for the 21-22 FAFSA, you are going to be using the 2019 taxes. You're going to be completing the 2019 taxes, and now hopefully you have already completed these because it's almost 2 years ago tax-wise. So if
you want to listen to this, Mike?
I'm kind of listening.
Everyone, so just hang on 1 second. Oh, okay. So I've actually muted everybody, so hopefully that'll help. I'll let a few more people in. Sorry, hang on 1 second. Okay, so hopefully everybody's in. Everybody's muted. And then you can always unmute yourselves if you want to ask a question later on or put it in the chat. Okay, sorry about that. All right, 2019 taxes, hopefully you have that put in, and you can actually use the IRS data retrieval tool. We'll get to that in just a little bit, but it is something that you'll be able to use to actually import your information directly from the IRS and put it into your FAFSA. It's going to ask also exactly what now if you don't use the data retrieval tool, you're going to have to put in, okay, what was the AGI, and then also go down to taxes and then wages as well. This kind of just talks about the wages. Even if you use the data retrieval tool, you'll still have to put in individually what parent 1 made from W-2s and what parent 2 made from W-2s as well. It does try to do like an auto populate a little bit, but you will have to make sure that those amounts are correct because it's just going off of what the AGI was. It's going to ask if in 2019 or 2020, if anyone in the parent's household received either Medicaid, SSI, hang on. Oh, okay, yeah, sometimes it does break up. It is going to be recorded, so hopefully, it won't come across like that in the recording. Unfortunately, also, I have realized when it rains outside, it doesn't do well for some of the recordings, but it will definitely come out. So it's going to ask 2019, 2020, any SSI, any SNAP benefits, any free or reduced lunch, any TANF or WIC, if any of those things were received in 2019 or 2020 in the household, you would check that box off. It's also going to ask if the parent paid any child support, if you perhaps have any taxable earnings from work study, untaxed income, if you received any child support, if you put any money towards your 401k during the year. It's not asking the total amount of your 401k, it's asking for whatever you contributed towards it during the 2019 year. And that would be something that is found on your W-2 forms in typically box 12 and the specific codes within that box. Okay, so if you answered all those questions, please note there's a lot of skip logic involved in the FAFSA, so you might not have to answer all of these. And if depending upon what you answer on one thing, you might be able to skip ahead, but the FAFSA will do all that for you as you're in there. One of the questions you might be asked is assets. And this is going to be based upon all the information you provided earlier on, the AGI and the wages. It's also going to ask you, it's not on this form, but it's also going to ask you how many people are in the household and how many people are in college. It is important to note that when they're talking about number of students in college, they're talking about the student themselves and then any siblings that they have that are in college at the same time. If you as the parent are in college during the upcoming school year, unfortunately you cannot be counted as being in college on the student's FAFSA. You can on yours, but not on the students. So based upon all that information from above, it may ask you to report your assets. And if they do, what you would have to provide for that, what is in your cash, savings, and checking accounts as of the day you're filling out the FAFSA. It's going to ask for net worth of other investments. Again, not your 401ks, not stocks or bonds. The net worth of if you have a business or potentially like an investment. This information again is as of the day you're filling out the FAFSA, whereas the 2021 FAFSA is based upon 2019 tax information. For the assets, it's actually as of the day you're filling out the FAFSA. So it's important to kind of keep track of all the different years that you have of information that you have to provide. After you complete all the information for the parent side, it's then going to go into the student information section. And it is going to ask all the same questions, but just geared toward the student. Now, not most times, I shouldn't say that, but a lot of times, students, in the prior 2 years did not work, whether they're, a sophomore, maybe junior in school, they were not working. So they might not have any tax information to provide, and that's perfectly fine. You would just say that, they're not going to file or they didn't earn anything, and you would just move along. If they did file taxes, they could use the data retrieval tool, which we'll talk about in a minute. They would have to put in their AGI. If they had any wages, you would put that section in as well. They might have wages but not have to have filed. Again, perfectly fine. You just say, not going to file and put in the wages earned. Again, it's also going to ask the student if they received SSI, SNAP, free, reduced lunch. And if they have, they would check those boxes. And As with the parents, they're also going to ask the student all the other additional financial aid information questions, such as, child support paid or received, or veterans benefits, those types of things. Most times these, students from high school don't have this information. It wouldn't pertain to them, so you would just kind of skip over those or answer no. But if they did have anything, those would have to be reported. And again, students might be asked about their assets as well. Same thing as the parents: cash, savings, checkings, investments. Most likely they don't have a lot, or any business or investment firms. So now that you kind of have an overview of the basic information you're going to need in order to complete the FAFSA, and you hopefully kind of complete that worksheet and have it all filled out to have yourself prepared, you then are going to go directly to the FAFSA website. And this is, you can go to FAFSA.gov or studentaid.gov. They will both take you to the same place. If you have never been to the site before, you've never filled out the FAFSA before, you're going to go to new. If you're a returning user, you would click in. If you've maybe already started your FAFSA, need to make a correction or add a school, whatever you need to do, you would go to just a login. Once you go to the login page, you're either going to say you're the student or you are the parent. For asking the student, are you the parent, it's really just to base how they present the questions to you. So if you click an I am the student, all the questions are going to be directed as, okay, as a student, did you have this information? Whereas the parent signs in, it's going to say, did your student or did the student? It's same questions, just how it's going to be presented. You select. Now, I've talked about the data retrieval tool a couple times already, but what it is that it takes the information that's on file from the IRS and plugs it directly into your FAFSA form. You do have to agree to have this, there's a button to click, say, yes, I'm approving for this to happen. I highly encourage that you do this. And the reason that I encourage you to do this is because when it does transfer the information, it is accurate information. And hopefully it does lessen the chances that you get selected for the verification process. The verification process, typically the federal government selects about, it used to be about 30%. It's going down more towards like 20-25% of all the students are selected for the verification process. And what this means is that the schools have to verify all the information you put on the FAFSA. And part of this would be income information. And if you don't use the data retrieval tool, you'll then have to provide tax transcripts or copies of your 1040s to the school. If you use the data retrieval tool, that's one less thing that the schools have to verify and one less thing that you have to provide. If you use the data retrieval tool, please know that you're not actually able to see the information that's being transferred over. It's for security purposes. You just agree to let the information transfer. It'll tell you the fields that are being transferred, but you and the student won't be able to see the amounts that are being populated. We, on the financial aid administrator side, can see all that information, but for security purposes, it won't just automatically populate up on what you're filling out. But again, I highly encourage that you use this. Both students and parents can use this as long as the the taxes have been completed for the 2019 year. There are a few instances of when you are not able to use it. Sometimes with identity theft, if that has happened, you are not able to use it. And also if you're married filing separately, you still can't use it just because there's two different things on file. But for the most part, you should be able to use this. And as long as you transfer and don't change any information, it would be the most accurate information that you can provide. This is available to you starting, October 1st. So just about a month ago, the data retrieval tool, along with the FAFSA, opened up on October 1st, 2020. So it is out there. You are able to go in and complete that. And I do recommend doing that as soon as possible. So after the FAFSA, once it's completed, you are going to get what we call a student aid report, or a SAR. We use lots and lots of acronyms in the financial aid world. So you will get used to it, but I wanted to just give you kind of an overview of some of the things that you might see. So on the SAR report, you will see I do a snapshot of all the information you just completed. It's just so that you can review it, make sure it's all correct, and if you need to make any corrections, you can. If you put in your email address when completing the FAFSA, this will be emailed to the student, to the email address on file. If there is not a valid email address, a paper copy will be sent to you, and this is an example of what the paper copy would look like. A couple things to highlight. The data release number over here, the DRN, it's a 4-digit number. Important, as this actually allows schools to potentially add themselves to the FAFSA, their school code. It allows us to go in and make some changes if need be. So it's an important number to keep in mind because schools might be asking for that number. And the other really important number is ESC. You'll hear this a lot. Oh, your EFC is this. Oh, it was based upon your EFC. Is a standard number that is used using the calculation based upon all the information you put into the FAFSA. Number in household, number in college, the amount of income, assets, or both student and parent, all that goes into the federal calculation. And what comes out of that is the EFC. It's a standard number that schools are really used to be able to package you accordingly. In this case, the EFC is 0. There's also an asterisk next to it, and that means that the student has been selected for the verification process and will need to provide additional information. And also have a C code, and the C code is not really a great thing because it means that there's some type of conflicting information that needs to be resolved before the financial aid office can put together a financial aid package for you. Oftentimes, this is either because the student has not registered for the selective service if they're a male student. It could be because citizenship issues that maybe it's not matching up correctly. Could be, date of birth and SSN mismatches. So there's a variety of reasons, but if you see a C code, it means you're going to be asked for additional documentation to make sure that we can have a valid FAFSA. You're in the FAFSA, before you hit the submit button, it is going to have you list up to 10 schools on the FAFSA form that you would like the FAFSA information to go to. So you can list up to 10 schools at a time. Each school will receive the FAFSA electronically within 3 to 5 business days of being completed. Sometimes it's only 2 days, sometimes it's longer just because maybe a weekend or a holiday thrown in there, or if it's really a busy time for their processing. I wanted to let you know though, so although you can only do 10 schools at a time, if you want to have more than 10 schools, receive your FAFSA, what you would do is you would list those 10 schools, you would submit the FAFSA through, wait about a week for it to process, go back in, take some schools off, and then add some other schools because you can only have 10 at a time. If you are doing this, if you're applying to more than 10 schools, you really need to keep a list to keep track of the schools that you're taking off and adding. Because if you take off a school that you actually end up going to or attending, they are no longer getting any of that updated information that might be coming through. So it's really important to keep track of all the schools you're taking off and adding on if you're applying to more than 10 schools. Again, they will receive it electronically within 3 to 5 days. You do have an option of doing a paper version of this. That's absolutely a possibility, but please note that it will take weeks for it to process, sometimes a month, depending upon signatures and all that. So your best bet is definitely to choose the electronic FAFSA. So once the school receives your FAFSA, they will see if you have an acceptance at that school from the admissions office. They will combine those things, and then they will start processing a financial aid package for you. And you'll actually see a range of when you're going to receive your financial aid award letters, your financial aid packages. It could be as early as, honestly, November for some schools if they're processing that quickly, December, February, all the way through March and April, depending upon the school. Sometimes state schools kind of wait until all their applications are in before they kind of start sending financial aid packages out. It just depends. So if you get a financial aid package in December from a school, don't panic if you haven't received anything else from your others. At Niagara specifically, we start sending ours out right after the Christmas break, so in early January is when we start kind of pushing out our first big batch of award letters. So don't freak out. If you're starting to compare schools, definitely maybe reach out to the schools you haven't heard from and just to see what their timeline is. And sometimes it might just be that you're missing some information that you need to provide. So it doesn't hurt to reach out and ask, but don't panic if you get something in December and don't hear anything from the other schools until maybe January or February. I'm going to take a quick look at the questions and see if there's anything I can answer now before we move on to the next component of this. Okay, let me look really quick. Okay. Question. So I believe Lockport City School was identified as a district that gave free lunches to all students. Would this count? Did you check that box or no? Yes, you could still. Let's see. No, you would only check the box if it falls within the criteria. So we've kind of heard two different things that you're able to get free lunches a little bit more because I've actually kind of both ways. That if you're getting free reduced lunch, you would be able to check that box, but I can double check on that for you. And then, is there a minimum age requirement to apply for FAFSA? I have a student graduating early who's only 16. No, there's no age requirement for the FAFSA. It's really based upon having that high school diploma. So the high school, as long as the student has that high school diploma, they would be eligible for Title IV aid. There's no age requirement. And then the other question is, for listing students in college on the application, are we listing our senior now? So I don't know, do you mean a senior in high school or senior in college? So if you have, when you're filling out the FAFSA, in high school, yes. So if you're filling out the 21-22 FAFSA, even though your student is a senior now, the application is for their first year of college. So yes, you would list them and then any other siblings that would be in college during the 21-22 year. No problem. I'm going to stop with questions for now. Keep shooting those in there, and then we will go on to the next portion. So I wanted to go over, as I said before, we use so many acronyms in financial aid, and we sometimes forget that not everyone knows what we're talking about. So I wanted to go over with you some of the more common things you're going to hear, and also how it relates to the financial aid packages. So what is the cost of attendance, or the COA, as you will hear referred to often? So the cost of attendance is comprised of direct cost and indirect cost. Direct costs are things such as tuition, fees, room and board if they're living on campus, potentially books and supplies if they're charged directly, anything that's charged directly to the student on their bill. And the indirect cost would be things like transportation, personal costs, room and board if you're living at home, things that we know that the student will encounter while they're at school, but that are not charged directly towards the student's account. So both the direct and indirect costs combine to create the cost of attendance. And this can vary widely from college to college because, as we all know, tuition costs and room and board costs are very different depending upon what school you're going to. But by federal regulation, we are unable to award or apply aid that is above your cost of attendance. So if maybe you're applying for, like a private loan or something, and you're taking it out for, let's say, $20,000, but your cost of attendance is only $15,000, you're limited to only the $15,000 being approved for that loan. So just kind of keep this in the back of your mind as you're going along, just to know that there is a limit to how much aid that schools and the federal government can award, and that you can apply for as well. So that's your cost of attendance. And have, which I talked about before, is your expected family contribution, or your EFC. So this is the amount a family can reasonably be expected to contribute towards the college education, with both parents and students combined. And it does stay the same regardless of college. Like I said, it is a standardized calculation that all schools look at from using the FAFSA to be able to package students. Whether you're going to, NTRIP or Harvard, that EFC is staying the same. Again, it is using that calculation from the federal formula. Let me go back. Is that with the EFC? So in that example with the SAR report that I showed, and they had a 0 EFC, even though they have a 0 EFC, that does not necessarily mean that their balance, that the student's balance is going to be $0. Again, depending upon the school, maybe if you're going to a state school and you have, Pell and TAP that covers all of tuition, you might not have a balance, and it's great. But if you're going to a private school, then most times you would still have a remaining balance. So it's not, please don't go by the EFC as like a hard and fast rule for, okay, this is what I'm going to owe. It is really more of just a standard way for us to be able to award the aid that we do have out to the students who are applying. Same thing if it's like a $10,000 EFC, that does not mean that your balance is going to be $10,000. It could be more, it could be less. You're going to hear a lot is financial need. And okay, how does a financial need get determined? What is that? So what it is that we take your cost of attendance, which again can vary from student to student, can vary from school to school. We take away your EFC, your expected family contribution, from the FAFSA, and that remaining amount is your financial need. And that means schools can package students with financial need-based awards up to that amount. This is very hard to compare from student to student because everyone is different based upon their cost of attendance and based upon their financial contribution. So it is hard to kind of compare, oh, well, my cousin got this award, but I only got this. Well, it's because, your financial situations could be different based upon those calculations. So the types of financial aid that you will see in a financial aid package, you have the 4 main categories. You have your scholarships, your grants. Those are, free money, grant aid, don't have to be paid back, something that, everyone would like, of course. And then you have your loans and your employment. And those two things we consider self-help. So the loans, whether it's federal or private, of course, have to be paid back after graduation or after the student stops attending, or less than 6 credit hours per semester. And then employment, which would be like work study or maybe some other type of on-campus employment. And this would be, they work, maybe like at Niagara, for example, they work 10 to 12 hours a week. And they can either get a paycheck every couple of weeks, or they could put some of that money towards their student account. So the first two things, don't have to be paid back. And the other two, the bottom two, loans and employment, either have to pay them back or you have to work in order to earn those off. So the sources of financial aid that provide those four things, the largest source is the federal government, and we'll get into that in a little bit more in the next slide. Then you have your states. If you're a New York State resident attending a New York State school, you would potentially be eligible for some state grant money. There's private sources, which kind of goes along with civic organizations and churches, like the Community Foundation of Greater Buffalo. Wegmans has scholarships, American Legion. There's all these different resources we have available in the community that would be able for students to go and apply for. And of course, I always forget to put this in, but another large source is the institution themselves. Especially private schools have a lot of endowments and merit-based aid that they would be able to award to students, and also need-based aid based upon those calculations. So if you're the federal government, the state government, the institution themselves, and then outside sources. Government, as I stated, largest source of federal aid, awarded primarily on the basis of financial need. And all of this is derived from the FAFSA form. So in order to be considered for any of the federal and state funding, you do have to complete the FAFSA form. It is an annual process. You do have to apply every year. The good news with the FAFSA is that years 2 through 4 are a lot easier because it's a renewal FAFSA. So a lot of that basic information you had to put in is already there. You just have to update taxes and the asset questions. So again, federal government, largest source of financial aid, but it is based primarily on the basis of financial need. So if you get a financial aid package and you don't see any need-based aid in there, the reason for that is most likely because based upon the cost of attendance and your EFC, you're just not eligible for any of that need-based aid. Common federal aid programs that you will see in the financial aid package could include the Pell Grant. This is probably the largest program that's around for federal aid. In order to be eligible for the Pell Grant, you have to have an EFC of about $5,700 or below. So if your EFC is $5,700 or below, you would be eligible for the Pell Grant, and that can range anywhere from a couple $100 all the way up to about $6,300 for the year. You then have the Teach Grant. This is for students who are going into the education field and who meet specific criteria. They have to go into specific majors who are going to be teaching in specific areas. Just know that, one, this is something you want to talk to the school about that you're applying to see if they, will process this for you and if you're eligible. But note that if you don't meet the qualifications, like after graduation, this would turn into a loan. So even though it says Teach Grant, it can potentially turn into a loan later on. There's the Opportunity Grant. This is, in order to be eligible for this, you do have to be eligible for the Pell Grant as well. But whereas the Pell Grant, if you're eligible for it, you get it. There's no restrictions on that. There's no limitations on how many students a school can award. If you're eligible for the Pell Grant, you get it. In comparison with the Opportunity Grant, although you do have to be Pell Grant eligible, each school has very limited funding for this, so you might not see that in your package just because of the lack of funding for that particular program. We just don't have a ton of it to go around. Then there's also the Federal Work Study. Again, this is the part of the employment that students could potentially have. Again, they might have the eligibility for it. You do have to have financial need in order to have a work study program awarded to you. But again, due to the most times limited jobs on campus for each school, you might not have this in your financial aid package, even though you might be technically eligible for it. I would say that's probably one of, the earlier you can get your FAFSA in and your acceptance into schools, the better, because especially if you want to be considered for the federal work study program. Subsidized and unsubsidized loans, these are federal loans in the student's name. Subsidized means that the government pays the interest on the loan while the student is in school. The unsubsidized means that they don't, so interest is accruing while the student is in school. Again, these are in the student's name. They are a loan. They would have to pay them back after graduation. In order to have the subsidized loan, the student does have to show that financial need. If they don't show any financial need, the entire loan would be considered an unsubsidized loan. There are caps on these. For freshman students, the cap for the freshman year is $5,500 total combination between sub and unsub. Then it goes up to $6,500 for sophomores, and then $7,500 for junior and senior years. You might be wondering why maybe, you only see 5,500. Well, that's the reason, is because there are annual limits on how much a student can have. And then the last one is a PLUS loan. So this is a federal loan as well, but it's actually in the parent's name. And this is why we suggest that both parents do at some point get their own individual FSA IDs, so that either one of them could apply for the PLUS loan if you decide to go that route. This one is, again, a loan, have to be paid back after the student graduates or stops attending, but it will always be in the parent's name. There is no way to transfer it onto the student unless you kind of make your own payment plan with them. But it is in the parent's name. It's a lot easier to get the PLUS loan as compared to a private loan. The PLUS loan really goes only off of credit score. So if you have a good credit score, most likely you would receive that, would be approved. You also have the option of declining that if you don't want to take it out. And if you actually get declined automatically from the government due to credit score or whatnot, the student automatically receives an additional unsubsidized loan of $4,000 for the year for the first 2 years, or $5,000 for junior, senior year. So kind of something to think about if maybe you only have a small gap remaining and need some additional funding, is to think about the PLUS loan as an option. The main federal programs. Then we're moving on to states. So as I stated before, if you're a New York State resident attending a New York State school, you might be eligible for some of the state grants. The biggest program, of course, is the Tuition Assistance Program, or TAP, as you'll hear it often called. This one does have a specific income requirement. So this one is based upon New York State net taxable income, a combination of parent and student. If that combined New York State net taxable income is $80,000 or less, then you should be eligible for the TAP grant. And this grant can range from $500 for the year all the way up to about $5,165 for the year. Again, depending upon income ranges. So that's the largest program. There are a few merit scholarships through New York State, although those do seem to be dwindling as the years go by, but some students still come through with those merit scholarships. And then of course the other large program through the state is either the Excelsior program or the Enhanced Tuition Award. The Excelsior program is where if you're going to a SUNY or a CUNY school and your income, this is your AGI income, is $125,000 or less, the student would be eligible for free tuition at the school, and that is free tuition minus any Pell or TAP that the student is already receiving. So depending upon your TAP and Pell amounts, you might already be receiving full tuition, and then you're not technically eligible for the Excelsior. If this is something you're interested in, definitely reach out to the schools you're applying to, or look onto the New York State website. There are a lot of criteria that come with this, that students have to be making academic progress. They have to be completing at least 15 credits, well, a total of 30 credits for the year, at least 12 per semester, but an overall of 30 credits for the year. If you fall off that bandwagon, you can't get back on, unfortunately. You also have to live in New York State for as many years as you received the grant. So let's say you received it for all 4 years, you technically have to live in New York State and work in New York State for 4 years after your graduation. If you don't, it turns into a loan. It is interest-free loan, which is good. But definitely there's a lot of things to take into consideration for this. So please look into this before you sign up for it. I have been asked the question, oh, I heard, the income limit was going up. Yes, I know it was proposed. I believe one of the proposals was 135, another one was 150. Those have not been passed. So currently it's still at 125,000. Now that's for the Excelsior program, and that's for state schools. The private school equivalent of that is called the Enhanced Tuition Award. This is not free tuition. It's up to $6,000 for the year minus any TAP grant that you've already would be receiving. Same income cutoff, same criteria requirements apply, but not every private school participates in this. Last I checked, there's maybe about 25, 28 private schools across New York State that were still participating. At Niagara, we participated for the first couple years. We no longer participate. There's just a lot of kind of hoops for students to jump through a little bit. The money didn't come in in until well after the semester ended. So we decided to discontinue it. But if that is something you're interested in, please check with the schools you're applying to make sure that they, to see if they do participate. The information in order to apply for this does come from the FAFSA. It actually, as soon as you're done hitting the submit button for the FAFSA, there's going to be a question, congratulations, you've submitted your FAFSA. Would you like to transfer your information from the FAFSA over to your state application? Please do this if you can. This makes life so much easier. If you go ahead and say yes, it will actually take you right to the state website. You can apply there. Again, it transfers over most of the information. There's still some things you have to fill out, and then you can hit submit right away. If you don't fill out the state application right after you finish the FAFSA, it's okay, but just know that you're going to have to wait about a week for the FAFSA to process and then send over this information to New York State. Then you're going to go onto the New York State website directly and create an application from scratch there. So still possible, still doable, but it's just a lot easier if you do it right after you complete the FAFSA to transfer the information. And something else I wanted to mention about the state application is that if you do transfer the information from the FAFSA, on the FAFSA you can list up to 10 schools. On state application, they only take one. So they're only going to take the first school that's listed on your FAFSA. And if you don't end up going to that school and you go to another school that's not listed on TAP, that money is actually going to go to a different school. So you need to make sure that you're keeping track of, what school gets transferred over, or what school you're putting on. And if you go to a different one, you need to make sure to update those school codes. Deadlines vary state by state. Also, if you are going out of state to a school, Pennsylvania or wherever, you would not be able to take your TAP grant with you. You can only use it in New York State. Private sources and employers, there are a ton of scholarships out there. Please start looking for them now. Community Foundation of Greater Buffalo is a really good one I always recommend. I have seen scholarships from them come through for about either $500 up to $6,000 for students per year. I'm sure, Lockport has in their guidance hall office, can't talk today, sorry. I'm sure there's scholarships that are maybe specific to Lockport High School students or the local area. Check with the colleges you're applying to. Like at Niagara, we have endowed scholarships that students can look for, or we know of other sources that you can apply to, American Legion, all those types of things. If you're part of a club or a group, they might have something. It does not hurt to ask, whether it's, even if it's only like $500, $200, that helps towards books. So every little bit does help. Write those essays if you have to. Try to reuse the essay, switch some things around, but try to apply for outside scholarships if you can, because it really does help really bring down that cost if you're able to. There are national websites out there too, like fastweb.com and scholarships.com you can search, but just know for those ones, you're competing with everybody in the nation. I always recommend trying to see what local ones you can find as well, because you would assume you'd have a better shot of getting one of those. I wanted to touch on special conditions and appeals. This is going to happen. So what these things are is that if income or the situation has changed since 2019, which with everything going on, things certainly have changed, things look different, make sure to contact the school. So the FAFSA information, you do have to use the 2019 tax information. You have to use that. But the school does have the ability to adjust that if they are able to. So whether it's a reduction in income or a loss of job totally, or maybe a divorce or separation, something that's not reflected on the FAFSA and has happened since then, contact the school and we'll see what we can do. Typically, we'll open up what we call like a special conditions form or professional judgment form or appeal form, whatever it might be called, and we're going to ask for additional documentation. So you're going to have this, available. You're going to have, unemployment statements, W-2s, or current pay stubs, I should say, anything like that that will pertain to it. Have that ready because schools will ask for it. I do recommend not really ask, if you're applying to 10 schools, probably you don't want to do this 10 different times. So I would only really contact the schools that you are really serious about to do this, because again, it could be a lot of documentation that you have to provide. Now, sometimes maybe nothing has changed, since you completed the FAFSA, but you just know that you're going to need some additional funds based, above and beyond what was already awarded to you. So don't hesitate to reach out to the schools to see what their process is, if they, even accept appeals, or if they do, if there's a specific form you have to fill out, or what they might be looking for. The worst, you can hear back is no. So it doesn't hurt to ask for sure if you find yourself needing some additional funds. I will say that if you start comparing school to school, make sure you have copies of those available and ready to provide to the other school. if you're trying to compare, one to the other, to, okay, this one gave me this much aid, I really need this much from you, what can you do? But again, don't be surprised if you hear no, because schools do have limited budgets themselves and are only able to award so much, as we do try to spread things around. But it certainly doesn't help, especially right now, as we know things are going on and things have changed so much. The very last thing I wanted to touch on before I get to any other questions. So we did go over the FAFSA on the web worksheet and that information. I also provided the booklet as well. I know it says Niagara University on it. It's really more general information. But the last thing on the very last page, page 9, it's also showing on the screen, is the financial aid award letter worksheet. And I really encourage you to use this or something like this. And what it is it's comparing each school to each other. So once you start getting those financial aid packages in, go through this and put down all the breakdowns. What are their direct charges? What are the grants and scholarships you're getting? What are the loans that are being offered? Work study, all those different things, because you really want to compare apples to apples. On the part of this, like I said, you want to compare apples to apples, because you might get a financial aid package that has like $30,000 in it, but maybe that school costs $60,000 to go to. And another school, you get a $20,000 package, but they only cost $30,000. So I know students can sometimes get, I don't want to say overwhelmed, that's not the word, but they get so excited about having this really large package, but they're not looking at the details of how much it might cost. So it's really important to do this breakdown to compare, and this will also help you not only for yourself when looking, but also if you want to start, like I said, comparing school to school when you're potentially appealing for additional money. This would help you as well to say, well, this one costs this, what can you do? So just some things to think about as you go through the financial aid process. I know there's a lot of information to take in and it can be overwhelming. Know that we are here to help you. Whether it's about Niagara or not, my team is more than able to assist on general financial aid questions, on the FAFSA questions. Again, there's my contact information and our general phone number as well. And also feel free to reach out to the other schools you're applying to. That's what the financial aid offices are there for, to help with these questions and help with these situations, because we know at times it can be a lot to take in and a lot to process all the different funds and whatnot. All right, I'm going to take a look at the chat. So if you have your other questions, feel free to send. Let me see. Where do we apply for the New York State financial aid? I can put that website in a second. I don't know if everybody did it. It is husk.ny.gov is the state site to apply directly for them. Oh, and great. In the link to the guidance page for great. Let's see. Oh, has to put that in there. Okay, and then when will we truly know what our EFC is? Will a final letter come telling us this information? So when you get your SAR, after you complete the FAFSA, you'll get the link to the SAR report, and that will tell you what your EFC is in there, your expected family contribution from the FAFSA form. As far as what your balance would be from the different schools, after all the other aid, that's going to be in those packets that are sent out to you. And most times, we're still mailing things out to the students and families, but sometimes they're just email only. So it's really important for the students to kind of keep track of what's coming in. They'll most likely have portals at the different schools to go in and view their award letters and their cost. But all that would be, through each school directly, as far as, the financial aid package and, what the remaining balance would be. Next question for the Excelsior. Yeah, that's close enough. Grant, when is it open? Was online looking at UB info and didn't see any other info about open to apply or deadline to apply. So yes, so the Excelsior program is based upon the budget each year, the state budget each year, which doesn't typically get passed until around April if we're lucky. So those applications typically don't apply or open until much later. You might have already decided on what school you're going to before those actually open in May. And typically they're due, July, August. This past year was a little weird with everything going on. Deadlines kept getting extended, but that's typically the normal deadline, is that it's, open April, May, and then due, July, August. What other questions? What is defined as a veteran's non-educational benefit? So this is if you are receiving, if you're for parent or yourself as a veteran, and you are getting, so you wouldn't count if they're getting any educational benefits. It would be more along the lines of like disability payments, those types of things, housing, those types of benefits. And there's actually, when you're in the FAFSA, it will define exactly what that means. So there's a lot of like little, you can ask a little question and it will actually pop up for what those mean. Did you already mention if the packet you're going over will be available at the school that we could pick up? So I already sent the packet over to Mr. Wilson. So I can't answer for him if he is going to make copies, but I'm sure they can also be emailed as well. Okay, asking questions. I am going to actually stop recording. Keep asking questions if you have any. Maybe I will stop.